Alright, welcome back to video 20, All Prophecies According to Christ, Matthew to Revelation, Rev 9 videos, the YouTube channel, and angloisrael.com is the website. So we left off at the end of Luke 24:45, and the last thing I mentioned was that at the beginning of Acts, that's where it said that all that happened right there, which is what I've been pointing out, is that Christ spoke from Moses, the prophets, and Psalms, and taught the apostles everything about himself. But obviously it wasn't everything until those last 40 days, which I just mentioned in the last video at the beginning of Acts. That's when they got the second coming of Christ. Because you notice before when he was telling them that he'd have to die and then all that, they didn't really understand all that. So, you know, even those things which are in prophecy in Moses, the prophets, and Psalms, in other words, they didn't really even understand that. So they didn't necessarily understand a whole lot of prophecy. That's why I said they didn't necessarily, when they were writing this, they were writing it through the Spirit, which obviously they got the Spirit later. We haven't quite gotten to that part about them getting the Spirit, but so that's what it really takes. It takes the Spirit of Christ for you to understand the prophecies and all that kind of thing. It really takes the Spirit of Christ. And only Christ can point it all out for you. I mean, you can read them, and they probably heard a lot of these prophecies. But that doesn't mean they understood much of it. And even being with Christ, they didn't understand things. So it was the last 40 days. He'd already taught them maybe a lot of the stuff about the first coming of Christ. But now is where he's getting it down to the second coming of Christ, because I pointed out that most of the prophecies about Christ is second coming, not first coming, which was the signs that the leadership wanted. That's why Christ prayed for them, that they didn't know what they were doing, because yes, they didn't understand the prophecies were about the second coming, that he had to die, he would come back later on. They didn't understand that. Most of us today would not have understood it. We would have said, same thing, well, he's not fulfilling all these prophecies. He's going to come, the hope of Israel, he's going to come back and resurrect the dead and all this kind of thing. Well, yeah, there were people that, came out of their graves and he was resurrected and so on, so they were confused. It was confusing. And he didn't really necessarily clear up the confusion, especially to the leadership. He probably tried to clear that up to them, and you can see that's kind of where they probably started teaching about him returning, because if you notice in their teaching in Matthew, Mark, and whatever, John, you can see they're teaching about the first coming of Christ, but then later on is when you get the teaching of the second coming of Christ, that he's going to come back, and that's where he's going to fulfill these prophecies. So you can kind of see that if you're paying attention. And we'll probably run into that. So we're going to go down to John and start with the book of John. This is video 20, if I didn't mention it. So the first one will be John. And a lot of these in John here, it's we haven't been through before. Malachi 4:5. Christ must be Elijah the prophet in Malachi, which is an end time context before Judgment Day. You notice he said, well, Elijah did come. And we assume from the reading, I always assumed that what he's saying there, he was talking about John the Baptist, but then I was looking at this, I was like, no, it looks like he's talking about himself, so we'll go look at that. John 1:21. Alright, 1:21. Now, we'll start with 19. This is the evidence. Oh, and by the way, let's go back up. 17. Although the law was given through Moses, the true gift came through Christ. No one has ever yet seen God. Okay. He has been made known by the only Son, who exists in union with the Father. Right. So my point about that is that God, no one actually seen the Creator. What they've seen is this manifestation of this angel, the Son of God, in various forms from Genesis on forward, and that's who Abraham knew was the Son, but he never actually saw God. No one actually saw God, because his power would just burn you to a crisp, I assume. I've got a quote on here. Let's go look at it real quick. I said 646. Okay, yeah, same thing. We get 646 of John. Everyone who has listened to the Father and learnt comes to me, not that anyone has seen the Father, except he who was with God. That one has seen the Father. Right. I'm the bread of life. Your forefathers ate the manna in the desert. So your forefathers, absolutely 12 tribes context. Because only the forefathers ate the manna would have been the 12 tribes, right? And then again, in 43, it says, Jesus replied and said to them, do not mutter. No one is able to come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will restore him at the last day. You see, the last day he's talking about is Judgment Day. And then he quotes Isaiah 54:13, which we've been there before. And this is Judgment Day at the last day. You see, this is the end time. So that's what they were talking about before, that they were waiting on this to be resurrected. But there he says right there that they would be restored, or in other words, resurrected at the last day. That's Judgment Day. It could be White Throne Judgment. But you notice when you look in Revelation, there's a first resurrection in chapter 20. And then there's a second resurrection at the last day. So there's actually two when you're looking at Revelation. So, like I said, people just don't. You got to look at. Let me have some water. You got to look at everything here and try to put it in context. So, 121. Excuse me. We'll look back to Malachi 4:5. Yeah, very end of Malachi. And now he's talking about the tares. Kind of go back to, 1 or 2, start at the beginning. And this is the last day it's talking about. For be assured the day comes that will burn like an oven, when all the cruel, all who practice vice will be stubble and will be burnt in that coming day. So this is the last day he's talking about right here in John, right? What he said over there, where we just came from. So, nor root nor branch left, but the Son of Righteousness. So that's talking about Christ will shine forth. Remember, King of Righteousness, Prince of Peace, no more war, right? Okay, so this is Melchizedek with restoration on his wings. You see, so he will come to restore. And that last day, when the wheat and the tares are going to be separated. So the wheat's going to be burnt, and he's going to separate the wheat from the tares. What did I say? The wheat? The tares will be burnt. I'm not sure what I said. All right. You shall be brought out and sport like a bullock from the stall and tread down the wicked. So it's talking about the Jews for Christ. In other words, the ones that will be resurrected will be brought out, sport like a bullock from the stall. In other words, they'll be loose. They'll run out, they'll tread down the wicked, for they will be dust under your feet. So that's the Israel people, of course. This royal priesthood or whatever. Okay. On the day when I perform it, which is the last day. To stay in context. Remember the laws of my servant Moses, which I commuted to him at Mount Horeb, and the institution and decrees for all Israel. He's not talking about the whole world then coming out. He just said it's Israel. And he's talking about the Son, in other words, Christ. So then, if it quoted Malachi 4:5, well, let's go back and look. What then? Are you Elijah? He replied, I am not. Then are you the prophet? Okay. Are you Elijah? No. Are you the prophet? No. Well, wait a minute. The prophet is Deuteronomy 18:15. We already know that Deuteronomy 18:15 is in the context of Christ, right? Of course, this is John. So John says he's not Elijah, and this Elijah that it just said goes to Malachi 4:5. Right. So Elijah is the son of righteousness, which is Christ. Okay. But later on, it looks like Christ is saying that John was Elijah. But no, Elijah, as we can see clearly, is Christ. Alright? And he tells you, follow God's law. And he says, this is whatever, the end of Malachi, for surely I will send to you Elijah the prophet. Okay, Elijah the prophet, before that great and terrible day of the Lord arrives, is Christ. He's actually talking about. Son of righteousness will shine forth, which he just said, before the terrible day of the Lord, and that's before judgment day. Of course, this is Malachi speaking about the future. He will turn the hearts of the fathers towards their children, children towards their fathers. So in other words, he'll bring everyone back together again. You know, lest I will come and strike the earth with a ban. Yeah, in other words, I come and strike and just kill everybody, which is what he told Moses he was going to do to begin with. And Moses said, no, don't do that. Okay. All right. Alright, well then over here at John, then he goes on down, verse 23, he says, I am but a voice proclaiming the desert, make ready the highway for the Lord. It was foretold by the prophet Isaiah, which we've been to. So there you go, we've been to Deuteronomy, but that's Christ is Elijah, the prophet. It's an end-time context before Judgment Day. This, Deuteronomy 18:15, that cross-reference back to Acts, we've been there. That's multiple prophecies, and let's just kind of roll up and look at that, or down, Acts 7:37 plus, Acts 7:37. Alright, so I got John 1:21, which is where we're at, Acts 3:23, both of those go to Deuteronomy 18:15. Okay, so I guess I got my description in Acts. Oops, there you go. Okay. Well, alright. Well, I guess this is really in the wrong place then. I should have written this over in John instead of having it here. Well, I've got it written out right, but whatever. Deuteronomy 18:15 was this prophecy. So it's 3 places. Quotes Deuteronomy 18:15, which is prophecy of Christ by Moses. And then if you read it, it's Jews against Christ taking out of the book of life for their unbelief after going through all these things and coming out of Egypt, and they still rejected God, rejecting this Christ, and then they worshiped Moloch and the star god, and they did all these things, so that's why they're taken out of the book of life. Wouldn't follow his law. 40 years in the desert, wouldn't follow his law. So that's what it boils down to. Okay. Alright, and then that, cross-references Mark 1:3, of course that's about the John the Baptist, been there at least once or twice, so let's go on to John 1:51. Alright, and this is just Christ speaking, but if you just back up to 1:44, okay, well, 1:43, Jesus desired to return to Galilee, and meeting Philip, he said to him, follow me. Okay. One to whom Moses referred to in the law, whom the prophets also wrote. So Moses referred to Christ in the law, that's 18:15, and of whom the prophets also wrote, so that's prophets and Psalms, we have found in Jesus, the son of Joseph, who came from Nazareth. Okay, well they knew he came from Nazareth. How is that? How did they know he came from Nazareth? See? In Galilee and all that. How did they know that? Nathanael asked, is it possible anything good could come out of Nazareth? Come and see, replied Philip. Jesus, seeing Nathanael coming towards him, remarked, here's an Israelite, indeed, whom there is no duplicate, in other words. So, here's an Israelite. Christ knows him before he even meets him, in other words. And he just questioned above, how can anything good come from Nazareth, right? Nathaniel. Yeah, Jesus said, here's an Israelite where there's no duplicate. What do you know concerning me? Asked Nathaniel, verse 48. So here he just questioned Christ, and Christ says, here's an Israelite, there's no duplicate. Wow. Before ever Philip called you, replied Jesus, while you were under the fig tree, I saw you. So he's like, wow, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. And he says, do you really believe? Verse 50. Because I've seen you beneath the fig tree, right? You will see far more than that. More surely, he added, you shall see the heaven open and the messengers of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So he's telling Nathaniel he's going to see that, which he might have seen then at the end time. So then Nathaniel might have been standing there, obviously, when he was taken up to heaven at the end, which we were just reading. So, maybe that's what it means. Now, it's referring back to Jacob's ladder, when Jacob was laying on this stone and had this vision. All right. And then that's the prophecy of Jacob. Well, and I said with Christ as the heir. Oh, okay. Genesis 28:12. All right. Well, let's just kind of go back and look at Genesis 28:12. 28. All right. All right. Start about 28:10. Jacob set out from the well of the oath, traveled to Haran, and he arrived at a place and rested there for sunset. So he took one of the stones, put it for his pillow, laid down. Then he dreamed and saw a ladder with its foot standing on the ground, and its head reaching to the heavens. And there were messengers of God ascending and descending. Yeah, well, you notice about the earth is a footstool, so in fact it might have been, his vision was probably of Christ, actually. So the ladder was like the legs of Christ, in a sense, more than likely. That's what that should look like. And he saw the ever-living stationed above, who said, yeah, I'm the ever-living God of your father. So what he's looking at is Christ. And the God of Isaac. So he says, Abraham and Isaac. So the land which you now lie upon I will give to you and your race shall be like the dust of the earth. So your posterity shall spread west and east and north and south, and all the nations of the world shall be benefited by you and your heir. Okay, well, they think then that means you and your children, so, you know, the children of Israel will be of benefit to all the nations. No, it's the resurrection of the people, of the 12 tribes that they were hoping on. They were hoping on the resurrection. They don't get resurrected by their offspring. The heir is the heir that he talks about, that Paul talks about, which is Christ, that was promised to Abraham. That's the heir, you see. So they read this wrong. They're thinking about the heir. At first, you think the heir is talking about Isaac when you go back to chapter 15 of Genesis, because it mentions an heir there, and you think, well, it's talking about Isaac. But no, the heir, the context is that Christ is going to be a benefit to all the offspring or the posterity of Abraham, and then Isaac, which comes through Jacob, which is the 12 tribes. So it's Christ, the heir, the future heir of Abraham, who inherits the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes inherit Christ. It's not a globalist thing. There's no globalism here. We haven't seen any globalism yet. be assured also that I am with you and will guard you whenever you go. There you go. There's Christ the shield right there. Okay. So Abraham had Christ the shield, and now we see Jacob has Christ the shield. That's Christ the shield talking to him. Okay. I will give you a quiet return to this country, for I will not forsake you until I have accomplished what I have promised to you. So that's Christ the shield making the promise, just like we saw Christ the shield in Genesis 15:1. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep. Now, and he said, the ever-living is certainly in this place, and I knew it not. So then is not this truly the house of God? In other words, where he was laying. So the house of God meant Bethel. It's not this truly Bethel. In other words, because he renamed the stone, as you can see just below, the stone which I placed for a pillow shall be a house of God. All that you give to me, I will return a 10th part to you. In other words, to Christ. Okay. And then he named the stone Bethel. It says, and Damluz was its former name, right? Which actually stood for the laws of Adam, probably. Then he vowed a vow, if God is with me and will guard me, in other words, if Christ will be my shield, right? Give me bread and clothing, bring me back safely. Then the ever-living. So he made it conditional. Anyway, then later on, you see him talking about the angel. The angel says, I am the God of the house of God. So the God of that stone, in other words, that he vowed to, right? Alright, here it is. I just said roll-ups in 31. So this is a story. And the ever-living, that's 31:2. Return to the land of your fathers and your birth, I will be with you. And that's what he just vowed over there, if you'll, until he came back to his father. So he made this vow on this stone. So, just what we're just looking at. So Jacob called Rachel and Leah to the field. I see that faced your father, and we all know that. God, however, did not allow him to do evil to me. Since verse 7 talks about his sheep, rams, and the messenger of God, or in other words, the angel. That's verse 11. Said to me in a dream, Jacob. I replied, I am here. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the rams, sheep, for all that Laban has done to you. I am the God of the house of God, Bethel, which you consecrated there in the pillar, which you dedicated to me, that stone, in other words, that he set up, consecrated, and then called it Bethel. Now, if you have an angel that says, I am God, that's Christ. And the angel is the shield. That's Christ. That's not God, you see. It's the personification of God as the Son of God, as Christ, the shield, the stone or the rock, and then the King of Righteousness, Melchizedek, or the Prince of Peace, whichever way you want to look at it. Either way, he knew him as this angel, the shield. Because he said, if he'd shield me and return me to my land of my father. So he knew Christ as Christ the shield in essence, but he also knew him as God. So he knew him as this King of Righteousness. So probably he called him the King of Righteousness, Prince of Peace. Probably that's what Melchizedek means. Probably that's what he called him. He just used that term, Melchizedek. Otherwise, why is it way up in the New Testament? Why is it in Psalms? Melchizedek. Okay, probably then that's what they knew Christ is, Melchizedek. Simple. Oh, and that's just once. It actually says another time that it makes it clear that it's If you go up 32 and read that story, here again, this is the angel wrestling with Israel. And you notice the angels, this is 32, start about 25. So it's 25 down through the end of chapter 32 of Genesis. All right. So he took them, passed over the brook, sent over them. Jacob, however, was left alone, and a man wrestled with him. Okay, so first it says it's a man who he's wrestling with. Until darkness, he saw, however, that he was not equal to this man. So, in other words, the man said he wasn't equal to Jacob, in other words. So he touched him in the hollow of the thigh and struck the hollow of the thigh of Jacob while wrestling with him. So, then he said, release me, for darkness is going. Okay. In other words, the man. However, but he replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So Jacob's asking this man to bless him. So then this man asks, what is your name? He said, I'm Jacob. When he responded, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you wrestled with a divine messenger as with men. So here you go. Now this man says, I'm a divine messenger. In other words, I'm an angel. You've been equal to me, because he struck him in the leg, trying to get him to let him go. All right. So then Jacob said, tell me your name. So he's asking the angel, what's your name? He says, why do you ask my name? But then he blessed him. He said, Jacob consequently called the name of that place Peniel, that is God's face. So now he calls this angel the face of God. For I have seen divinities face to face and preserved my life. Alright, so here it's God's face, and he's saying I've seen God's face to face, so I've wrestled with God as an angel. Well, if he's wrestled with God as an angel, again, and this angel has the ability and the authority to change the name of Jacob to Israel, then that's Christ. Alright? Alright. Christ the heir of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all 12 tribes at the end time, fulfills Genesis 15:1 as Christ the shield. John 2:17. So you see, if we just read this stuff, it works out. Verse 17. Do not turn my father's house into a market. Alright, so back up. 13. Now when the Jewish Passover was near, Jesus went to Jerusalem, entered the temple. He found dealers in oxen, sheep, pigeons, money brokers, think bankers, transacting their business. So here you go. His temple was all about making money off the people coming to the temple. That's what it says. That's what the whole thing was about. How much money can we make off these stupid people coming to listen to us? They were teaching, the Talmud. They were teaching God's law. Christ told them what they were doing. Then, having made a whip of cords, that's verse 15. So, John 2:15. So, yes, he got a little pissed off. He's standing there making up a whip of cords. Then he drove them all out of the temple, taking that whip, whipped them, including the sheep, the oxen, scattered the money on the ground, overturned their stands, and said to the pigeon dealers, take them outside, do not turn my father's house into a market. His disciples were then reminded that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. Psalm 69:9. The Jews then said, well, what proof do you show us that you're doing this? Christ has demolished this temple, and in 3 days I will rear it. Well, he's talking about himself being killed and then resurrected. Again, it's not a prophecy that was written. See? And there's no quote to the Old Testament where it says that. I don't know. Of course, they're looking at it as the temple they're in, but that's not what he's talking about. Because it just says, afterwards, when he's raised from the dead, his disciples remembered It said that, and they believed the scriptures as well as the statement of Christ. So the scriptures they believed was about the how Christ would be crucified and all that. However, I don't see anything about the third day in the Old Testament, so not for sure. Alright, but it says, many believed on his name, verse 23, seeing the proofs which he gave. Alright, so they saw. So, I said, you go to Psalm 69:9, it's Jews against Christ, crucified Christ to fulfill his prophecies. And of course, all of his prophecies in context, and Moses, the prophets, and Psalms are obviously in context for the 12 tribes. There's no Gentiles in Psalms. And we'll look at Romans 15:3 when we're sitting here, because let's see what I put that on here for. Oh, well, yeah. That's also quotes Psalm 69:9. Yeah. For Christ did not indulge in himself, but as it's recorded, the abuse of your insulters fell on me. Verse 4, and whatever was formerly written was recorded for our instruction, so that by the support and consolation of the scriptures we might have hope. And then what is the hope? You go down to verse 8. For I repeat, Christ became a servant of circumcision for God's truth and confirmation of the promises to the fathers. Alright, promises to their fathers. It's 12 tribes. But he praises God for his mercy to the heathen. And then he quotes these verses, which we'll get to in Romans, which all apply when you go back and look at them. Psalms, Isaiah, Psalms, Deuteronomy. Well, geez, everything he quotes here, it says Gentiles. They changed to Gentiles. Mine just says nations or heathen. And King James decided, no, we'll just change all this to Gentiles, and then say Gentiles are not 12 tribes. But when you go look up all these quotes, all the quotes in context are about the 12 tribes. So they just changed it. They just inserted, created this word and said, well, we're going to tell people that all these words we're putting in here mean, non-Israelites. Okay, well, let's go look at Psalm 69:9. So it's just, they just made it up. It's just like the Talmud. They just, traditions of men. Well, that's what we have today. Gentiles is just created by the traditions of men, the traditions of people that lead, these professors and these PhDs, and they know all it means is nations. If they left it nations, you would have just gone and looked up then, well, what nation? Of course, you want to know. Inquiring minds want to know what nations is it talking about, these prophecies to. And then when you got back there, you would see the nations of the 12 tribes. So, problem solved. You don't need somebody to teach you that. Just go look it up. Alright, 69:9. For you I have suffered reproach. My face has been covered with shame. I became to my brother a stranger, and unknown to my own mother's son. Okay, talking about Mary. For the zeal for your house has consumed your insulters' abuse fell on me, so I wept in depression of soul, and they threw that on me to insult. When I took for my clothing a sack, from them I was subject to scorn. Against me the nobles conspired. So the people we've already read, the ones that were guilty, the ones that got the Romans to do their dirty work because they were in control of things. But still, people that got Pilate to kill him, which he didn't want to. See, he didn't find him guilty. So they got Pilate to kill him, even though Pilate didn't find him guilty. They just went along with, the leadership, the nobles, right? And satires, the drunkards, composed, but I pray to the life for good times. In your great kindness, answer me, God, and you in your faithfulness save, right? Okay, but we got more about Christ just below. Then redemption. So if you get on 19, haste to answer, for I am in grief. Redemption, oh, bring to my soul, redeem me, right? So raise him from the dead, which he did. And then 20 through 22 is about Christ, which also quotes back. So, and then about, these Jews against Christ, 23. Make their table a trap, a punishment to them, and snare. Let their eyes be obscured from the light. Who? Well, the people that were just guilty of his death, which it says, these nobles. All along. It doesn't change context. All these prophecies say the same thing over and over and over again. You got these people who worship Moloch. Pour out your anger on them. Let your fierce wrath overtake. Let their castles be wrecks and their halls. For they chased after him you had struck, and added anew to your wounds. Yeah, so let them add fury to passion. Verse 28. So 28 to 30 is about these Jews against Christ, and let them not come to your rest. Blot them from the book of lives. Well, there you go. That's what I've been saying all along. They were blotted out from the book of lives, and these people, when he questioned them, said, talking about their forefathers which killed the prophets, and Christ said, well, that shows that you're the posterity of these that killed the prophets. In other words, these people who were taken out of the book of lives from before. So you just told us that you're their children, so there you are. You're children of Satan, because you're taken out of the book of lives. It wasn't that they weren't Israelites. They were Israelites. They were Israelites when they built the golden calf. Weren't they Israelites 40 years in the desert? Of course they were. That's what Christ actually says. He talks to them, always talks to them as if they're Israelites. He doesn't say they're not Israelites. Okay. So just want to listen. I got a lot of that today. At any rate, you can read the rest of it. So, Christ to fulfill the prophecies of his redemption, yes. Yeah, I said they crucified Christ to fulfill his prophecies of redemption. But yes, the whole idea about the redemption was that he would bring all 12 tribes back together at the end time, but he would have to have died first to, and jeez, with his death and all this about his death in prophecy, multiple prophecies, and it's really amazing when you look at the whole context of this and how he prophesied his death all these years before, and then, didn't even, he said they didn't know what they were doing, yes, but he didn't, point out to them what they were doing, that, he was going to fulfill these prophecies later, and then just, let him kill him and crucify him, and knowing that, he's coming back, and he could have explained that, but he didn't. So they killed him because they said, well, you're not fulfilling these prophecies because they're looking at the prophecy of the second coming. Yeah, that's right. But he could have corrected that belief and that understanding, and then maybe they wouldn't have killed him. So it's like, wow. I don't know how to explain all that. So I won't. Just go on. All right, John. So we got quite a few things here in John. So John 4:37. Look at that. Sower is one, the reaper another. So if you back up, the disciples began asking each other, has anyone brought him food? So they don't understand what's going on. But, so you should actually back up a little bit, because this is Christ talking to the woman at the well. Now wait a minute. Got to go all the way back to 4:7. A woman from Samaria came along to draw water. So a woman at the well, give me a drink. Her disciples were gone. The Samaritan woman, however, replied to them, how can you, being a Judean, so Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan? Because it says, for Judeans do not associate with the Samaritans, right? Well, originally that would have been, house of Judah. Of course, the Samaritans would have been house of Israel, which is divorced, which means they're not associated anymore because you were divorced from the covenant, right? However, Jesus said, if you had recognized the gift of God and who it is who's saying to you, give me a drink, he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman replied, you have no bucket. Surely you cannot be greater. Where then have you the water of life? Verse 12, surely you cannot be greater than our forefather Jacob. Wait a minute. So she understood this water of life comment. He said he would have given you living water. So she understood water of life. Because she says, surely you cannot be greater than our forefather Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it, as well as his sons and his cattle. Okay, so the well then is the well of Jacob, right? It says Jacob's well, actually, in 4 verse 6. Jacob's well was there, it says, right? All who drink of this water will thirst again. Whoever may drink of the water which I give him will never more be thirsty, but the water I will give to him become in him a spring of water flowing into eternal life. So that's the Spirit of Christ is what he's talking about. The well of water is the Spirit of Christ, which means you understand his word and all of that kind of thing. So you understand his prophecies and so forth. So the woman says, give me that water, verse 15, so that I may not yet get thirsty, I have to come all the way here to draw. Well, she's thinking of water, so Jesus says, go call your husband and return here. I have not a husband. You answer well, I have not a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have at present is not your husband. Okay, She said 5 husbands, and she's got a boyfriend now. Hard to get along with, apparently. Verse 19. I perceive, sir, that the woman, you are a prophet. Why? Because, but then she says, our forefathers worshipped in this very mountain. Well, she wouldn't say our forefathers, being Jacob's well, knowing the history of the well, unless she meant worshipped who? Of course, they worshipped Christ, this, Melchizedek, Christ the shield. She knew that. So our forefathers meant she was an Israelite, or from one of the tribes, obviously. Otherwise, probably wouldn't have said that. And if her forefathers didn't worship in the mountain, then probably she was not part of the 12 tribes, in other words. But you say that in Jerusalem is the spot where one ought to worship. Woman, believe me, Jesus answered, verse 21, the time is coming when neither in this mountain nor yet in Jerusalem will you pay honor to the Father. Okay, the time is coming, but not in this mountain, at Jacob's well, or Jerusalem. Right, not in that Jerusalem. Because the Jews for Christ left, and they went to another Jerusalem that was prophesied to Joseph. An empire, a Christian empire. So, under Manasseh and Ephraim, they went and started these new 2 empires of Christian people, which were his salt, as he said in Matthew, but eventually that these 2 empires of salt, which were teaching the message of Christ, would eventually lose their salt and be judged. Then he would come back, and then everything would be straightened out. That's the second coming. That's the context. You pay honor without knowledge, we pay honor with knowledge, because the salvation comes from among the Jews. Yes, well it does, if you want to look at it as salvation comes from among the Israelites. In other words, which is all it means. It's all he's been talking to, are Israelites, 12 tribes. So the salvation does come from among the 12 tribes. That's the prophecy. salvation was Christ, the heir of Abraham. That's the prophecy. So salvation does come from among the Jews in the context of the prophecies, which we've all been discussing up to this point. Time will come, is even now here, when the real worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth. Yes, the real worshipers then are the ones that stand up for truth in the spirit, which, that's when you really understand it. That's when you have the spirit, because indeed the Father desires such to be his worshipers. God is spirit. Those worshiping him must worship in spirit and truth. So if you teach things that aren't truthful and people show you that it's not truthful and you continue on, then you don't have a spirit. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah, verse 25, the one who is called consecrated, is coming. Okay, well here again, that proves that she knew about the Messiah. So she was one of these people of the 12 tribes who knew about the Spirit, knew about Melchizedek, had heard the story, and knew the Messiah was going to come and resurrect, just like we've already read. When he arrives, he will tell us all. Jesus said to her, I am the one who speaks. Well, she knew what I am. When someone says, literally meant I, but I am the creator, if you want to look at it that way. I mean, Alright, I'm the one speaking to you. So, if he said I am, then she knew that meant that he is the Messiah. That's what that would have had to have meant to her, if she knew that the Messiah was coming, right? Consecrated. So the disciples returned. What are you discussing? The woman left her bucket, went off to town, got the men. Come here. Here's a man who's told everything I've ever done. Must this be the Messiah? Well, yeah, it must be. You were expecting it. There he is. He would fulfill the prophecies. Much, or she would expect him to do that. Alright, so this is apostles say, take something to eat, verse 31. He said, I have food to eat you know nothing about. Well, they didn't know what that meant. Thinking people brought him food. My food is to do the will of my sender and to accomplish his work. So sent there by the Father. Do not say the harvest comes from me the fourth month. See, look up, I tell you, survey the fields, for they are already white for harvesting. Alright, so this thought is truth. The sower is one, the reaper another. I sent you to reap that which you have not cultivated. Others have cultivated, and you enter into their cultivation. So he's sending workers, just like he was there to accomplish the work of his sender. Others, later on, will sow the message of Christ. Others will come along to reap. So he'll send people and empower them through the Spirit to understand his prophecies, and then to explain those and to be preachers and teachers and all that. Okay. And that quotes Micah 6:15. Except I wrote on here, Micah 6:15 is about Babylon the Great. Jews against Christ are judged at the end time by Christ, but Jews for Christ are redeemed. So, so go back to Micah 6:15. Starting about 13. So I have inflicted disease, that's disease on the house of God, will waste you because of your sins. You shall eat, but never be fed, but feel emptiness in your breast. You shall fly, but never escape. What escapes I will give to the sword. You shall sow, but you shall never reap. So there again, dress the olive, but do not use its oil, and ferment, but then won't drink of the wine. So you'll do all this work, and then these armies are going to come along and strip everything, which is also mentioned in other prophecies. So this is the same context. So if you just back up to verse 8, he has shown you what is right, and what does the Lord seek from you? So, what does he seek from you? To administer justice, correct justice, or righteous justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God, Same thing. In other words, follow his law, proper justice system. That's all he wanted you to do. Teach it to your children, so on and so forth. Right? Alright, well, who's he talking to? Okay, well, we'll come back and we'll just look over the context of Micah, because it's all end time. It's all about judgment on the house of God at the end time. It's only talking about the 12 tribes. There's nobody else in these scriptures here except the 12 tribes being judged. End time context. Can't say it's anything else. And then you get to the end of Micah. What does it say? Giving truly to Jacob the promise to Abraham as he swore to our fathers in days long ago, which is exactly what she just said to him. That she knew about the Messiah. There you go. The promise to Abraham. That's how it ends. So we'll come back and look at a little overview of Micah then. And that'll be video 21, I guess. Yeah. Alright, thanks for watching.